The wind howled across the plains of West Texas, kicking up dust that stung Winifred Novak's eyes as she staggered from the stage coach, one hand clutching her portmanteau, the other desperately holding her hat in place. Del Rio wasn't much to look at, just a cluster of buildings huddled against the vast emptiness, but after 3 days of bone-jarring travel, it looked like paradise. The year was 1876, and the country was celebrating its centennial far away in Philadelphia. Here on the frontier, such festivities seemed as distant as the moon. Winifred Winnie, to anyone who knew her longer than 5 minutes, had come to this remote outpost with nothing but determination, and the teaching certificate folded carefully in her bag. "Madam, you'll want to get inside before this dust storm picks up proper," the stagecoach driver called as he tossed down her trunk. "Town hall's that way, they'll direct you to where the schoolmarm's supposed to stay." Winnie nodded her thanks, gathering her skirts to keep them from the worst of the dust. At 22, she had already taught 2 years in Boston, but the confinement of city life and the supervision of the school board had grown stifling. When the advertisement for a teacher in Del Rio, Texas had appeared in the newspaper, she had applied immediately. Her mother had wept, her father had argued, but Winnie had persevered. Now, squinting against the sun, she wondered if her stubbornness had led her astray. The town hall turned out to be little more than a wooden structure with pretensions, its facade reaching higher than its neighbors as if straining for importance. Inside, a man with an impressive mustache looked up from his paperwork. "Miss Novak?" he asked, standing so quickly his chair nearly toppled. "I'm Mayor Patterson. We weren't expecting you until next week." "The stage from San Antonio was earlier than anticipated," she replied, setting down her bag and removing her gloves. "Well, this is a bit of a predicament," the mayor tugged at his mustache. "The schoolhouse isn't ready yet, and the living quarters are still being furnished. We've been using it for town meetings since the last teacher left." Winnie's heart sank. "I see. Is there a hotel where I might stay in the interim?" "Del Rio's growing, Miss Novak, but we're not that fancy yet. We've got a boarding house, but it's full up with railroad men." He considered for a moment. "The Yancey Ranch is just outside town. Mrs. Yancey sometimes takes in boarders, and she's a respectable woman. Her son runs the place now, has for 2 years since his pa passed." And that was how, an hour later, Winnie found herself in a wagon driven by the mayor's teenage son, heading out of town toward the rolling hills dotted with scrub and the occasional oak. The dust storm had blown itself out, leaving behind a sky of startling blue and air that smelled of sage and earth. The Yancey Ranch appeared first as a smudge on the horizon, then gradually resolved into a substantial single-story house, a large barn, several outbuildings and corrals filled with horses. As they approached, Winnie saw a man astride a magnificent chestnut horse moving among a small herd of cattle. "That's Flynn Yancey," the boy said. "He don't talk much, but he's fair. His ma runs the house like a general, but she bakes the best pies in the county." Winnie watched as Flynn guided his horse with subtle movements, his broad shoulders shifting beneath his worn shirt. Even from a distance, there was something compelling about the efficiency of his movements, the quiet authority he exuded. When they pulled up to the house, an older woman emerged, wiping her hands on her apron. Martha Yancey was perhaps 50, with streaks of gray in her dark hair and lively brown eyes that assessed Winnie with frank curiosity. "So you're our new schoolteacher," she said after introductions were made. "Patterson sent word with one of the hands, said you need lodging until the school's ready." "If it's not too much trouble, Mrs. Yancey," Winnie said. Martha laughed. "Trouble is what makes life interesting, my dear. Come in, come in. I've got a room you can use. It's plain but clean." The interior of the ranch house was surprisingly spacious, with a large kitchen dominated by a cast-iron stove, a comfortable sitting room with well-worn furniture, and a hallway leading to several bedrooms. The room Martha showed her was indeed plain but spotlessly clean, with a narrow bed, a chest of drawers, and a small table with a pitcher and basin. "Supper's at 6, Martha said. "My son Flynn and a couple of the hands eat here. The rest have their own bunkhouse. We don't stand on ceremony, but we do wash up before sitting at the table." Left alone, Winnie unpacked her few belongings, arranging her books on the windowsill. She had just finished when she heard the sound of boots on the porch, followed by male voices in the kitchen. Smoothing her hair and straightening her collar, she ventured out to meet the rest of the household. Flynn Yancey was taller than she'd expected, easily 6 feet, with shoulders broadened by years of ranch work. His face was tanned by the sun, with lines at the corners of his eyes that suggested he squinted a lot in the Texas brightness. His hair was the color of dark honey, and his eyes, when they met hers, were a startling blue. "Miss Novak," Martha said, "this is my son Flynn." "Flynn, this is the new schoolteacher who'll be staying with us until the schoolhouse is ready." Flynn nodded, his expression neutral. "Madam," he said simply. "Mr. Yancey," Winnie replied, extending her hand. "Thank you for your hospitality." He took her hand briefly, his palm calloused against her smoother skin. "Not much hospitality to it. Ma does all the work." "Flynn," Martha chided, "don't scare the girl off before she's had a chance to settle." Something that might have been amusement flickered in Flynn's eyes. "Didn't mean to scare anyone." Supper was a lively affair, with Martha and 2 ranch hands, Lewis and Tom, carrying most of the conversation. Flynn ate methodically, speaking only when asked a direct question. Yet Winnie found herself aware of his presence at the head of the table, the careful way he listened to everything, missing nothing. After the meal, as Martha cleared the dishes, Lewis pulled out a guitar and began to play a soft melody. Tom produced a harmonica from his pocket, and soon the kitchen was filled with music. Winnie, helping with the dishes despite Martha's protests, found herself humming along. "You know this tune?" Lewis asked, his fingers not pausing on the strings. "It's similar to ones I've heard before," Winnie admitted. "Sing it then," Martha encouraged, drying her hands. "It's been too long since we've had music with supper." Winnie hesitated, then began to sing, her clear soprano filling the kitchen. The men fell silent, listening, before Lewis picked up the melody again, adapting to her version of the song. When she finished, there was a moment of appreciative silence. "Well now," Martha said, beaming. "That was lovely." Winnie looked up to find Flynn watching her, his expression unreadable. When he noticed her gaze, he looked away, rising from the table. "Got to check on that new foal," he said, heading for the door. "Good night, all." Over the next few days, Winnie settled into life at the Yancey ranch. Each morning she rode into town with whoever was headed that way, spent the day helping to prepare the schoolhouse, and returned in the evening. Martha was unfailingly kind, and the ranch hands treated her with a mixture of shyness and gallantry that she found endearing. Flynn remained something of a mystery. He was often gone before she woke, returning late in the evening. When they did encounter each other, their exchanges were brief and polite. Yet she sometimes caught him watching her with an intensity that made her pulse quicken. A week after her arrival, Winnie was in the barn, having wandered there out of curiosity during a rare moment of leisure. The smell of hay and horses was oddly comforting, reminding her of childhood visits to her grandfather's farm in Vermont. A soft nickering drew her attention to one of the stalls. Inside was a mare with a foal so young it still wobbled on its spindly legs. The sight was so charming that Winnie couldn't help but laugh softly. "He's just 5 days old." She startled at Flynn's voice behind her. "He's beautiful," she said, turning to find him closer than she'd expected. "What's his name?" "Don't have one yet," Flynn replied, moving past her to enter the stall. The mare greeted him with a gentle nudge, and he ran a hand down her neck. "Usually wait to see what kind of personality they develop." "That's wise," Winnie said, watching as the foal approached Flynn with curious, wobbling steps. "Name should mean something." Flynn glanced at her, one eyebrow raised slightly. "Most folks just pick whatever sounds pretty." "Well, I'm not most folks, Mr. Yancey." The corner of his mouth lifted just slightly. "No, I don't reckon you are." He stroked the foal's muzzle. "You can come in if you want. Daisy won't mind, and the little one's friendly." Winnie carefully entered the stall, mindful of her skirts. The foal immediately abandoned Flynn to investigate this new visitor, sniffing at her hand and then her dress. "He's fearless," she laughed as the foal nudged her insistently. "Curious," Flynn corrected. "Good trait in a horse. Makes them smarter, more adaptable." He was watching her rather than the foal, his blue eyes thoughtful. "What about in people?" Winnie asked, meeting his gaze. "Same applies," he said simply. They stood in companionable silence for a moment, the foal exploring between them, occasionally returning to its mother for reassurance. "Why Del Rio?" Flynn asked suddenly. "Seems a long way from wherever you started." Winnie considered the question. "I wanted somewhere real," she finally said. "Boston was all rules and appearances. I taught there for 2 years, but the children were learning to be proper, not to be alive." She stroked the foal's soft neck. "I thought perhaps out here where life is less confined I might teach something that matters." Flynn nodded slowly. "Not many would leave comfort for that." "Perhaps I'm not many, Mr. Yancey." That almost smile appeared again. "No, Miss Novak, you surely aren't." A call from outside interrupted their conversation. "Boss, that stray bull's back in the south pasture." Flynn's expression shifted immediately back to its usual reserve. "Duty calls," he said, stepping out of the stall. Winnie followed, disappointed at the interruption but warmed by the brief connection. "Thank you for introducing me to your horses." He nodded, already moving toward the barn door. "Miss Novak," he said, pausing briefly, "if you're interested, we're breaking some new horses tomorrow. Might be educational for a curious person." Before she could respond, he was gone, striding across the yard to where a ranch hand waited on horseback. The next day dawned clear and cool, perfect weather for the work ahead. Winnie had decided to forego her trip to town, sending word with Lewis that she was familiarizing herself with local customs. Mayor Patterson would understand. He'd been encouraging her to learn about ranch life to better connect with her future students. She dressed in her most practical outfit, a sturdy brown skirt and white shirtwaist, and braided her hair tightly to keep it from the wind. When she emerged from her room, Martha looked her over with approval. "Good choice," she said, handing Winnie a cup of coffee. "Ranch work's no place for frippery. The men are already out at the corral. Take this basket of biscuits. When you go, they'll be hungry by mid-morning." The corral was a hub of activity. 4 cowboys, including Tom and Lewis, were preparing ropes and saddles under Flynn's direction. A separate pen held several nervous young horses, their coats gleaming in the morning sun. Flynn noticed her approach first. He wore no jacket today, just a blue shirt with the sleeves rolled up, revealing forearms corded with muscle. His hat was pulled low, shadowing his eyes. "Miss Novak," he acknowledged. "Wasn't sure you'd come." "I said I was curious, Mr. Yancey." She held up the basket. "Your mother sent provisions." The men brightened at that, thanking her as she distributed the still warm biscuits. Flynn took his with a nod, their fingers brushing momentarily. The touch, brief as it was, sent an unexpected warmth through her. "Ever seen horses broken before?" he asked, leading her to a spot along the fence where she'd have a good view but be safely out of the way. No, though I've read about it. A hint of amusement crossed his features. Books and reality don't always align, Miss Novak. That's why I'm here to see for myself, Mr. Yancey. The work began in earnest then. Winnie watched, fascinated, as Flynn and his men worked with the young horses, not breaking their spirits as she'd feared, but building trust through firm, patient handling. Flynn, in particular, had a way with the animals, his deep voice soothing even as his hands remained steady and authoritative. "He's good with them," Martha said, joining Winnie at the fence mid-morning. "Always has been, even as a boy. His father used to say Flynn could gentle a tornado if he set his mind to it." "I can see that," Winnie replied, not taking her eyes off Flynn as he worked with a particularly spirited bay. "He's patient." "With horses, yes," Martha chuckled. "With people, less so. Flynn's never been one for idle chatter. Says words are just a way for folks to dance around what they really mean." Winnie considered this. "There's wisdom in that view." "Perhaps," Martha agreed, "but it can be lonely too." She patted Winnie's hand. "I'm glad you came to watch. It's good for him to remember there's more to life than work." Before Winnie could ask what she meant, Martha was gone, heading back to the house. In the corral, Flynn had managed to get a saddle on the bay and was now preparing to mount. "This one's got spirit," Lewis called from the fence. "Might give you a run, boss." Flynn merely nodded, checking the cinch one last time before smoothly mounting the horse. For a moment, everything was still. Then the bay exploded into motion, bucking and twisting in an attempt to dislodge its rider. Winnie gasped, gripping the fence as she watched Flynn stay seated through the violent movements, his body moving with the horse rather than fighting against it. There was something breathtaking about the display man, an animal locked in a contest of wills, neither willing to yield. After what seemed an eternity but was probably less than a minute, the bay began to tire. Its bucking became less violent until finally it stood trembling, sides heaving. Flynn leaned forward, speaking words Winnie couldn't hear, his hand stroking the horse's sweaty neck. "That's it," Tom said beside her. "He's won." Indeed, Flynn was now guiding the bay in a circle, then in figure eights, the horse responding to slight pressures from his legs and subtle shifts of weight. When they finally stopped near Winnie's position at the fence, both man and horse were breathing hard. Flynn dismounted, keeping a hand on the bay's bridle. His shirt was dark with sweat, his face flushed with exertion, but his eyes were bright with satisfaction. "What do you think?" he asked, looking directly at Winnie. "Different from your books entirely," she admitted. "It was magnificent." Something in her tone made his eyes narrow slightly, the intensity of his gaze increasing. For a moment, they simply looked at each other, the connection between them almost tangible. Then Lewis called for assistance with another horse, breaking the moment. Flynn handed the bay's reins to Tom. "Cool him down, then give him some water," he instructed before turning back to Winnie. "Stay if you like. We've got 3 more to go." She stayed for the rest of the morning, watching as each horse was worked with in turn. Flynn's methods varied slightly depending on each animal's temperament, but his patience never wavered. By the time they broke for the midday meal, all 4 young horses had been successfully saddled and ridden, though they'd need many more sessions before they'd be fully trained. "Your school's about ready," Flynn remarked as he walked Winnie back toward the house. "Patterson was by yesterday, said they'd finished the living quarters." "Oh," Winnie was surprised by the twinge of disappointment she felt. "That's good news. I'll be able to prepare for classes." Flynn nodded, his expression unreadable. "When will you move?" "I suppose as soon as possible. The term starts in 2 weeks, and there will be much to organize." They walked in silence for a few steps. Your mother has been very kind, Winnie added. I've enjoyed my stay here immensely. Ma likes having another woman around, Flynn said. Place has been too quiet since Pa died and my sister married and moved to California. I didn't know you had a sister. Fiona, 2 years younger than me, married a fella who went west for the gold fields. Didn't find gold but started a freight business instead. They do well. It was the most personal information Flynn had volunteered since her arrival. Encouraged, Winnie asked, "Do you miss her?" Flynn considered this. "Yes," he finally said. "Fiona had a way of making this place feel alive. Like you did today, watching us work." The compliment, delivered in his straightforward manner, warmed her more than effusive praise would have. "Thank you for allowing me to observe." They had reached the house, but Flynn paused before they entered. "Miss Novak," he began, then hesitated. "Winnie." It was the first time he'd used her given name. "Would you consider coming to the town dance before you start your teaching duties? Saturday next. It's nothing fancy, but folks enjoy it." Surprise rendered her momentarily speechless. Was Flynn Yancey asking to court her? His expression gave nothing away, his blue eyes steady on hers. "I would enjoy that very much," she finally replied, her heart beating a little faster. "Thank you for the invitation." He nodded once, as if having completed an important transaction. "Good, I'll let Ma know. She'll want to fuss over what you'll wear." With that, he held the door for her, and they entered the house where Martha was laying out a simple but hearty meal. If the older woman noticed anything different in their demeanor, she gave no sign, but Winnie caught her hiding a smile more than once during the meal. The next day, Winnie reluctantly packed her belongings, preparing to move to the schoolhouse living quarters. Martha insisted on sending along jars of preserves and a freshly baked loaf of bread to start your pantry properly, and Flynn arranged for Tom to drive her into town. "I'd take you myself," Flynn said as Tom loaded her trunk onto the wagon, "but I've got to ride to the North Range. Might be gone a couple days." "I understand," Winnie said, trying not to show her disappointment. "Thank you again for your hospitality." Flynn looked as if he wanted to say more, but merely nodded, his hat brim shielding his eyes from the morning sun. "Saturday," he said simply. "For the dance." "Saturday," she confirmed, climbing onto the wagon seat beside Tom. As they pulled away, Winnie looked back to see Flynn still standing in the yard, watching them go. Martha stood on the porch, waving cheerfully. Winnie waved back, feeling as if she were leaving home rather than a place she'd stayed for barely 2 weeks. The schoolhouse stood on the edge of Del Rio, a sturdy wooden building with large windows and a small bell tower. Behind it was a modest dwelling consisting of 2 rooms, a combination kitchen and sitting room, and a bedroom. Simple furniture had been provided, and someone, likely the mayor's wife, had placed a vase of wildflowers on the small table. Winnie spent the rest of the week settling in and preparing for classes. Mayor Patterson introduced her to several families whose children would be her students, and she began to form a picture of the community she'd be serving. Del Rio was growing, thanks to the new railroad connection, but it was still a place where everyone knew everyone else's business, and a new face, especially a single female teacher from the East, was a subject of intense interest. Saturday arrived with a flutter of anticipation in Winnie's stomach. She had brought one good dress with her from Boston, a deep blue silk that brought out the gray of her eyes. As she dressed, arranging her light brown hair in a simple but elegant style, she found herself wondering what Flynn would think. The thought brought a blush to her cheeks. It was foolish to be so affected by a man she barely knew. Yet there was something about Flynn Yancey that touched her in a way no one ever had before. The town hall had been transformed for the dance. Benches pushed against the walls and lanterns hung from the ceiling. A small group of musicians, including Lewis with his guitar, played lively tunes in one corner. The room was already half full when Winnie arrived, and she was immediately surrounded by people eager to meet the new schoolteacher. She was in the middle of a conversation with the blacksmith's wife when the room seemed to shift, conversations pausing briefly before resuming. Looking toward the door, Winnie saw Flynn entering, accompanied by his mother. He had cleaned up, his usually wind-blown hair neatly combed, and he wore a dark jacket over a clean white shirt. He looked handsome and distinctly uncomfortable. His eyes searched the room, finding her immediately. Something in his expression softened, and he made his way toward her with Martha following, greeting neighbors as they went. "Miss Novak," he said when he reached her, his voice a low rumble that somehow carried over the music and chatter. "You look lovely." "Thank you, Mr. Yancey," she replied, suddenly shy. "You look very handsome yourself." Martha beamed at both of them. "Doesn't he clean up nicely? Took some convincing to get him out of those work clothes, but a dance calls for proper attire." She patted her son's arm. "Now I see Mrs. Henderson over there, and she promised me a recipe for pickled beets. You young people enjoy yourselves." Left alone, they stood in awkward silence for a moment. Then Flynn cleared his throat. "Would you care to dance, Miss Novak?" "I would, Mr. Yancey," she replied, placing her hand in his outstretched one. "And please call me Winnie. Miss Novak sounds as if I'm still your house guest rather than your friend." His hand tightened slightly on hers. "Winnie," he said, the name sounding different in his deep voice. "And I'm Flynn." He led her to the center of the room where other couples were already dancing. The musicians had started a waltz, and Flynn placed his hand at her waist, maintaining a respectful distance between them. He moved with surprising grace for a man who spent most of his time in a saddle, leading her confidently through the steps. "You dance well," Winnie commented, looking up at him. "Ma insisted both Fiona and I learn properly," he replied. "Said we might be ranchers, but we weren't going to be savages," Winnie laughed. "That sounds like your mother." Flynn's expression warmed. "She likes you, says you've got grit beneath those fancy manners." "I'll take that as a compliment." "It is," he assured her. "Highest one she gives." They danced 2 more dances before taking a break for refreshments. Flynn fetched them both cups of punch, and they found a relatively quiet corner to catch their breath. "How are your preparations for the school term coming along?" he asked. "Well, I think," Winnie replied. "Though I'm a bit nervous about having students of such varied ages and backgrounds. In Boston, classes were more homogeneous." Flynn nodded. "You'll have children who have never opened a book alongside some who have had tutors. Ranch kids who can barely attend in winter when work is lighter, and town kids who will be there every day." "Exactly. It's a challenge." "You'll manage," Flynn said with quiet confidence. "You've got a way about you, steady but kind. Children respond to that." Winnie was touched by his assessment. "Thank you. That means a great deal." Their conversation flowed more easily after that, touching on books they'd read, places they'd been, and their differing experiences growing up. Flynn, she learned, had been educated partly at home and partly at a boarding school in San Antonio, his father believing that a rancher needed to understand business as well as cattle. "I hated it at first," Flynn admitted. "Felt trapped inside those walls. But the library, that was something else. Books about places I'd never seen, ideas I'd never considered, changed how I saw the world." "What was your favorite?" Winnie asked, fascinated by this glimpse of the thoughtful man beneath the taciturn exterior. Flynn considered for a moment. "Thoreau, maybe. Walden. Something about a man finding meaning in solitude and nature spoke to me." "Yet here you are, surrounded by people and dancing," Winnie teased gently. His blue eyes held hers. Some company is worth seeking out." Before she could respond to that meaningful statement, Martha approached, her expression concerned. "Flynn, Tom just came in looking for you. Says there's trouble at the ranch, something about rustlers spotted near the north pasture." Flynn's demeanor changed instantly, the relaxed man of moments ago replaced by the focused rancher. "Excuse me, Winnie, I need to see to this." "Of course," she said, concerned by the sudden tension in his face. "Is there anything I can do?" "No, but thank you." He hesitated, then added, "I enjoyed our dances. Perhaps we can continue another time." "I'd like that very much." Flynn nodded to her, squeezed his mother's hand, and strode toward the door where Tom waited, his expression grim. Martha sighed. Never a dull moment in ranching. "I'm sorry your evening was cut short, my dear." "It's quite all right," Winnie assured her. "Is it serious, do you think?" "Cattle rustling always is," Martha replied soberly. "Men have been killed for less out here, but Flynn knows what he's doing. He won't take unnecessary risks." Despite Martha's reassurance, Winnie found her enjoyment of the dance diminished by worry for Flynn. She stayed another hour out of politeness before allowing Mayor Patterson to escort her back to the schoolhouse. The next day passed slowly, with no news from the ranch. By Monday morning, Winnie was thoroughly distracted, her thoughts continually turning to Flynn and whether he was safe. She was arranging books on the schoolroom shelves when a shadow fell across the doorway. Looking up, she felt a surge of relief at the sight of Flynn standing there, his hat in his hands. He looked tired, with a day's growth of beard on his jaw, but otherwise unharmed. "Flynn," she said, unable to keep the gladness from her voice. "You're all right." "I am," he confirmed, stepping inside the schoolroom. "Caught one of the rustlers. The others got away, but they won't be back, not to our range anyway." "I was worried," Winnie admitted, setting down the book she'd been holding. "Were you?" Something in his tone made her look at him more closely. There was a vulnerability in his expression she hadn't seen before. "Yes," she said simply. "Very much so." Flynn nodded, taking a few steps closer. "I thought about you while we were riding, about our dance and how it ended too soon." "We could always continue it," Winnie suggested, her heart beating faster as Flynn moved closer still. "I'd like that," he said. "But first I wanted to ask if I might call on you properly. Sunday dinners, maybe a picnic when the weather's fine." Winnie smiled, happiness blooming within her. "I'd like that very much." "Good." Flynn's relief was evident. "I ain't good with words, Winnie. Actions make more sense to me, but I want you to know my intentions are serious. I've never met anyone like you." Touched by his honesty, Winnie closed the distance between them, placing her hand on his arm. "You don't need to be good with words, Flynn. Your actions speak clearly enough." The look he gave her then was so full of emotion that words indeed seemed superfluous. Slowly, giving her time to pull away if she wished, Flynn leaned down and pressed his lips gently to hers. The kiss was brief but tender, a promise rather than a demand. When they separated, Flynn's eyes were warm with affection. "I should go. You have work to do, and I've got a ranch waiting." "Sunday dinner," Winnie confirmed. "I'll be here at noon," Flynn promised. "And Winnie, thank you for understanding what I couldn't say." With that, he placed his hat back on his head and departed, leaving Winnie standing among her books, her fingers touching her lips and her heart fuller than it had ever been. The school term began the following Monday, with 27 students ranging in age from 6 to 16 filing nervously into the schoolroom. Winnie had prepared meticulously, organizing lessons that would challenge the advanced students while supporting those with less education. Flynn appeared faithfully each Sunday, sometimes bringing Martha along, other times coming alone. Their courtship progressed steadily through the autumn months, each week deepening their understanding of one another. Flynn remained a man of few words, but those he chose were meaningful, and Winnie came to treasure the quiet moments between them as much as their conversations. In October, he took her riding across the Yancey ranch lands, showing her favorite spots: a hidden spring surrounded by cottonwoods, a ridge overlooking the valley where his cattle grazed, the grove where his father was buried. In November, when an early cold snap hit, he appeared at the schoolhouse with firewood and helped her weatherproof the windows, working alongside her in companionable silence. December brought Christmas preparations and a special program at the school, with Flynn sitting proudly in the audience as Winnie's students performed recitations and songs. Afterward, as they walked back to her quarters through a light dusting of rare Texas snow, Flynn took her hand. "I've been thinking," he said, his breath visible in the cold air, "about us." Winnie's heart skipped a beat. Oh, they stopped walking, and Flynn turned to face her, snowflakes catching in his honey-colored hair. "I love you, Winnie. I think I have since that first day when you sang in Ma's kitchen. I'm not an easy man, and ranching isn't an easy life, but I'd be honored if you'd consider becoming my wife." Joy swept through her like a warm tide. "I love you too, Flynn. And yes, I would very much like to be your wife." The smile that transformed his face was like sunrise breaking over the plains. He pulled her into his arms, his kiss deeper and more passionate than their previous embraces. When they finally parted, both were breathless. "When?" he asked simply. "Spring," Winnie replied. "After the school term ends. I wouldn't want to leave my students mid-year." Flynn nodded, understanding in his eyes. "Spring it is. We can start fixing up the east wing of the house. It's been empty since Fiona left, but with some work, it would make a fine place for us to have some privacy while still being close to Ma." The thought of creating a home with Flynn filled Winnie with happiness. "That sounds perfect." The news of their engagement spread quickly through Del Rio, met with general approval and more than a few knowing smiles. Martha was ecstatic, immediately beginning plans for a wedding celebration that would bring together the entire community. Winter passed in a flurry of teaching, wedding preparations, and stolen moments with Flynn. The east wing of the ranch house was renovated under their joint direction, becoming a cozy haven that reflected both their tastes: Flynn's practicality, balanced by Winnie's touch of elegance. As spring approached, Winnie found herself increasingly drawn to the life that awaited her at the ranch. She loved teaching, but the thought of being Flynn's wife, of building a life together on the land he cherished, filled her with anticipation. One Saturday in early April, as wildflowers began to carpet the plains, Flynn took her to the ridge overlooking the valley. The view was spectacular, the landscape awakening with new growth after the winter's dormancy. "This land changes you," Flynn said, his arm around her waist as they surveyed the vista. "Becomes part of you in a way that's hard to explain to those who haven't lived here." "I understand," Winnie replied softly. "I feel it too, the openness, the honesty of this place. It demands the same from the people who live here." Flynn looked at her with appreciation. "You do understand. That's why I knew you belonged here, belonged with me, even before I could put it into words." Winnie leaned against him, contentment settling deep in her soul. Sometimes the most important things don't need words at all. The wedding took place on the last Saturday in May, after the school term had ended. The ceremony was held outdoors at the ranch, beneath an arbor constructed by Flynn and his men and decorated with wildflowers gathered by Winnie's former students. Winnie wore a gown of ivory silk that Martha had helped her select on a special trip to San Antonio. Flynn, standing tall and proud beside Pastor Williams, watched her approach with such naked adoration that murmurs of approval rippled through the assembled guests. Their vows were simple but heartfelt. Flynn's deep voice steady as he promised to love and cherish her all the days of his life. Winnie's response was equally firm, her gray eyes never leaving his blue ones as she pledged herself to him. The celebration afterward lasted well into the night, with food, music, and dancing under the stars. As midnight approached, Flynn and Winnie slipped away to the privacy of their newly renovated wing of the house, now truly their home. "Mrs. Yancey," Flynn murmured as he closed the door behind them. "I still can't quite believe you're really my wife." "Believe it," Winnie said, stepping into his embrace. "I'm yours and you're mine, and all the words in the world can't express how happy that makes me." His kiss was answer enough, and as they came together as husband and wife, Winnie knew with absolute certainty that she had found where she belonged. Life as a rancher's wife brought challenges Winnie hadn't anticipated, but also joys beyond measure. She continued to teach, riding to the schoolhouse each day during term and returning to help with ranch duties afterward. The community soon grew accustomed to seeing her moving between these two worlds, earning respect for her dedication to both. Flynn, true to his nature, expressed his love more through actions than words, ensuring her horse was always the gentlest in the stable, building bookshelves for her growing collection, listening attentively as she shared stories from her school day. In private moments, he became more eloquent, his body communicating what his voice sometimes couldn't, leaving Winnie in no doubt of his devotion. A year into their marriage, as summer heat settled over the land, Winnie confirmed what she had begun to suspect: she was with child. Flynn's reaction to the news was everything she could have hoped for, his usually stoic expression transforming into one of wonder and joy. "A baby," he said, his hand gentle on her still flat stomach. "Our baby." "Yes," Winnie smiled, covering his hand with her own. "Due around Christmas, Doctor." "Miller thinks." Flynn pulled her carefully into his arms. "I'll build a cradle," he said immediately. "Oak, I think, strong but not too heavy." Winnie laughed softly. "Already planning, are you? Need to be prepared," he replied seriously, though his eyes twinkled. "Babies don't wait for procrastinators." She kissed him then, overwhelmed by love for this thoughtful, practical man who was already thinking of how to care for their child. The pregnancy progressed well, though Winnie reluctantly took a leave of absence from teaching as her condition advanced. The school board hired a temporary replacement, a young woman from San Antonio who boarded at the mayor's house and consulted Winnie frequently on lesson plans. December brought unusually harsh weather, with a blue norther sweeping down from the plains, bringing freezing temperatures and sleet. Flynn was constantly attentive, ensuring the house was warm and Winnie had everything she needed. Martha was equally solicitous, preparing nourishing meals and sharing wisdom from her own experiences of motherhood. The baby, however, had its own schedule. 2 weeks before Christmas, in the middle of the night during the worst of the storm, Winnie woke to the unmistakable pains of labor beginning. Flynn, instantly alert, lit the lamp and assessed the situation with his characteristic calm. "Too dangerous to try reaching town in this weather," he decided after looking out at the ice-covered landscape. "I'll send Tom for the doctor, but we should prepare as if we're on our own." Martha, awakened by their voices, took charge with the efficiency of a woman who had birthed children on the frontier before. "Boil water," she instructed Flynn, "and bring clean linens from the press. Winnie, my dear, let's get you comfortable. This may take some time." The labor progressed steadily through the night and into the morning, Flynn remaining by Winnie's side, despite Martha's suggestion that men usually waited elsewhere. "My place is here," he said firmly, holding Winnie's hand through each contraction, his strength anchoring her through the waves of pain. The doctor never arrived, prevented by the treacherous roads, but he wasn't needed. Just as dawn broke, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold, Winnie gave birth to a healthy son, his lusty cries filling the room as Martha efficiently cleaned and wrapped him. "A boy," Flynn whispered, wonder in his voice as Martha placed the infant in Winnie's arms. "We have a son." Winnie looked down at the tiny face, already showing signs of Flynn's strong features. "William," she said, "after my father. William Flynn Yancey." Flynn nodded, his eyes suspiciously bright as he reached out to touch his son's small hand. "William," he agreed. "A good, strong name." As the sun rose fully, bathing the room in golden light, the small family huddled together on the bed, marveling at the miracle they had created. Outside, the storm had passed, leaving a landscape transformed by ice that glittered like diamonds in the morning light, beautiful, challenging, and full of promise, much like the life they shared. Young William thrived, growing from a solemn infant into a curious toddler with Flynn's blue eyes and Winnie's determined spirit. He became a fixture at the ranch, carried on his father's shoulders as Flynn made his rounds, or sitting on a blanket under a tree while Winnie worked in the garden she had established. When William was 2, Winnie returned to teaching part-time, bringing him with her to the schoolhouse 2 days a week. The arrangement worked well, with the older students taking turns entertaining the little boy during their breaks, teaching him games and songs that he repeated at home to his parents' amusement. Life settled into a rhythm that suited them, all the busy seasons of ranching balanced by quieter periods, the school terms punctuated by holidays and celebrations. Flynn and Winnie's partnership deepened with each passing year, their initial attraction maturing into a love that was both passionate and comfortable, built on mutual respect and shared dreams. 4 years after William's birth, their family expanded again with the arrival of a daughter, Elizabeth Martha Yancey, named for both grandmothers. Ellie, as she was immediately called, had Winnie's light brown hair and curious gray eyes, and from her earliest days showed signs of a lively, talkative nature that amused everyone, especially her more reserved father. "She's got more words in her little finger than I've got in my whole body," Flynn remarked one evening as he watched 3-year-old Ellie chattering to her dolls. "Wonder where she gets that from." Winnie, grading papers at the table, looked up with a smile. "Are you implying something about my conversational tendencies, Mr. Yancey?" "Just observing, Mrs. Yancey," Flynn replied with a straight face, though his eyes danced with humor. "Just observing." Their banter was interrupted by 7-year-old William, who entered the room with a serious expression. "Pa, thunder's favoring his left front leg. I checked like you showed me, but I couldn't find anything wrong." Flynn nodded, treating his son's concern with appropriate gravity. "Good eye, Will. We'll check him together in the morning. Might just be a stone bruise, but best to be sure." Winnie watched the exchange with pride. William was becoming more like his father every day, observant, responsible, and deeply connected to the ranch. Yet he also showed an aptitude for learning that matched her own love of education, devouring books and asking thoughtful questions about the world beyond Del Rio. As the children grew, so did the ranch and the town. The railroad had brought more settlers, and Del Rio was now a proper community with several stores, a bank, and even a small hotel. The school had expanded to 2 rooms, with Winnie taking the older students while a younger teacher handled the primary grades. Flynn, always forward-thinking, had increased the ranch's holdings and improved their breeding stock, establishing the Yancey brand as one of the most respected in the region. Yet despite their growing prosperity, he remained the same straightforward, hard-working man Winnie had fallen in love with, still a man of action rather than words, still most at home on horseback under the vast Texas sky. One evening in their 10th year of marriage, after the children were asleep, Flynn and Winnie sat on the porch, enjoying the cool breeze after a hot summer day. Fireflies danced in the gathering dusk, and somewhere in the distance, coyotes called to one another. "You ever regret it?" Flynn asked suddenly. "Coming here, marrying me this life?" Surprised by the question, Winnie turned to look at him. "Never," she said firmly. "Not for a single moment. Why would you ask such a thing?" Flynn shrugged, his eyes on the darkening landscape. "Letter came today from your friend in Boston, the one who writes twice a year. She mentioned all these things happening there: museums, concerts, lectures. Things I can't give you here." Winnie reached for his hand, threading her fingers through his. "Flynn Yancey, look at me." When he did, she continued, "I have everything I need right here. Yes, Boston has its attractions, but it never had you or our children or this land that gets into your blood and becomes part of you. I made my choice with my eyes open, and I would make the same choice again every day for the rest of my life." Flynn's expression softened, the worry lines around his eyes easing. "I just want to be sure you're happy." "I am," Winnie assured him. "Deeply, completely happy. Are you?" "More than I ever thought possible," Flynn admitted, bringing her hand to his lips. "You and the children, this place, it's everything to me." They sat in companionable silence for a while longer, watching as stars appeared one by one in the velvet sky. It struck Winnie then, as it sometimes did, how far she had come from the uncertain young woman who had stepped off a stagecoach in Del Rio 14 years ago. She had found not just a home but a purpose, not just a husband but a partner in the truest sense of the word. "What are you thinking?" Flynn asked, noticing her contemplative expression. Winnie smiled, leaning her head against his shoulder. "That some journeys take you exactly where you're meant to be, even when you don't know that's where you're headed." Flynn's arm tightened around her. "Couldn't have said it better myself," he murmured, pressing a kiss to her temple. And as night settled fully over the Yancey ranch, Winnie reflected that perhaps this was the greatest gift of their life together, not the grand gestures or passionate declarations, but these quiet moments of perfect understanding, where hearts communicated what words never could. The years continued to pass, marked by the changing seasons and the growth of their children. William, at 16, was already showing signs of becoming the man he would be: thoughtful like his mother, steady like his father, with a natural aptitude for ranching that made Flynn proud. Ellie, at 12, was a spirited girl with a quick mind and a talent for music, filling the house with songs and laughter. Life brought its share of challenges: drought years that tested the ranch's resilience, illnesses that left them anxious, the inevitable conflicts that arise in any family. But through it all, Flynn and Winnie's partnership remained strong, their different strengths complementing each other in ways that made them more effective together than they could ever have been apart. On their 20th anniversary, Flynn surprised Winnie by taking her back to the ridge where he had proposed. A picnic had been prepared, with a bottle of good wine and Martha's famous apple pie. As they sat together overlooking the land that had been their home for 2 decades, Flynn took Winnie's hand. 20 years, he said softly. "Sometimes feels like yesterday we were dancing at that town social." Winnie smiled, the memories as clear as if they had just happened. "And sometimes it feels like we've always been together, as if my life before you was just preparation for this." Flynn nodded, understanding perfectly. "I have something for you," he said, reaching into his pocket and pulling out a small velvet box. Inside was a ring set with sapphires that matched her eyes, surrounding a diamond that caught the afternoon sunlight. "Flynn," Winnie breathed, touched beyond words. "It's beautiful." "Wanted to get you something special," he explained, taking the ring and sliding it onto her finger beside her wedding band. "Something that would remind you how precious you are to me, even when I don't say it enough." "You say it in 1,000 ways every day," Winnie assured him, cupping his weathered face in her hands. "In how you care for me, for our children, for this land we love." Flynn turned his head to kiss her palm. "Still, a man should tell his wife he loves her. Especially a wife who's put up with him for 20 years. Winnie laughed softly. "I wouldn't call it putting up with you. Loving you has been the great joy of my life." "And mine," Flynn said simply, pulling her close for a kiss that held all the passion of their youth and all the deeper understanding of their years together. As the sun began its descent toward the horizon, painting the sky in brilliant oranges and pinks, they gathered their picnic and prepared to return to the house where their children and Martha would be waiting to continue the anniversary celebration. Standing at the crest of the ridge, Flynn paused to look out over the ranch one last time. "Never gets old, does it, this view?" "Never," Winnie agreed, "just like us." Flynn's laugh was warm and genuine. "Speak for yourself. I found another gray hair this morning." "Distinguished," Winnie corrected, linking her arm through his. "You're becoming distinguished, Flynn Yancey." "If you say so," he conceded, leading her toward their horses. "And what about you? Still as beautiful as the day you stepped off that stage." Winnie blushed, still susceptible to his compliments after all these years. "Flatterer. Just telling the truth," Flynn replied with a shrug. "Always have." And that, Winnie reflected as they rode home side by side, was perhaps what she loved most about this man: his honesty, his directness, his ability to see the heart of things and speak to it without pretense. He might never be a man of many words, but the ones he chose were always true. The future stretched before them with its unknowns and challenges: William considering college in Austin, Ellie showing interest in becoming a teacher like her mother, the ranch continuing to evolve with changing times. But whatever came, Winnie knew they would face it together, their bond forged through years of love, respect, and the deep understanding that sometimes came without words at all. As they approached the ranch house, lights glowing warmly in the gathering dusk, Winnie felt a profound sense of gratitude for the life they had built. From that first encounter in the barn with a wobbly foal between them to this moment, riding home to celebrate 20 years of marriage, their journey had been one of continuous growth and deepening love. Flynn, as if sensing her thoughts, reached across to take her hand, their horses moving in perfect tandem. "Ready for the next 20 years, Mrs. Yancey?" Winnie squeezed his hand, her heart full. "With you, always." And as they dismounted in the yard, greeted by the excited voices of their children and Martha's welcoming smile, Winnie knew with absolute certainty that she had found not just a home but a destiny in this remote corner of Texas, with a man who had once said he wasn't good with words but had nonetheless spoken directly to her heart from the very beginning.